These are some observations on the Enfield Pritchett cartridge as I've come to make them and to use them. My cartridges are by no means constructed historically, but as a shooter, they function historically. This is most important. This style of cartridge was first used with the 1851 mini rifle of Crimean War fame, and was later adapted for use with the P-53 Enfield rifled musket, used famously during the Indian Mutiny and other global conflicts. My initial experiments were conducted with a Lyman old-style bullet as was found during the American Civil War. These were fashioned into cartridges using wax paper and served merely as a container for the lubricated round and powder rather than a fully functioning Enfield paper cartridge. The transition to a functioning paper cartridge needed only one critical component: the bullet. Initially, I thought I would be forced to use a sized down Lyman bullet, but this was far from the perfect solution. Another option was an antique mold, but these were very hard to come by and usually cost prohibitive. I found this company on the internet, Brooks Molds, and I sent them this diagram. Shortly after, they presented me with this high quality and fully adjustable for length mold that was everything that I needed. The ability to change the length of the bullet, combined with the provision of an extra base plug forming a shallower base cavity, provided the flexibility for any shooting requirement. For shooting my Parker Hale P-53 Enfield, I've settled on a shallow cavity bullet that is 1.06 inches long. It's important to note that I don't use a base plug in any of my bullets. With an overall diameter with the paper of 0.576, there's no need for one. The powder cylinder was the next component to be developed and finalized. There were three main patterns of powder cylinder adapted during the lifespan of the Enfield paper cartridge. It was the first or earliest pattern that was most suited to my application. This pattern created an independent powder cylinder within the cartridge. By being independent, this powder cylinder style was reusable. Initially, I used two pieces of computer paper wrapped around the mandrel, covered with a piece of wax paper to form the end of the powder cylinder. Subsequent to that, I began using cardstock to replace the computer paper, as it was easier to handle and much more durable. I found the ultimate in durability and reusability in 9/16 thin-walled plastic tubing, a 2-inch piece of which, with a fiber wad superglued at an appropriate height, served to create a most robust article that also made rolling of the outer wrapper easier. A key advantage of the plastic variety of powder cylinder is that it has a consistent overall diameter, unlike its cardstock and computer paper cousins, which must have an appropriately sized mandrel to give the correct diameter. Trial and error is the only way here. Next to the bullet, the outer wrapper is the most important component of the Enfield paper cartridge. Key aspects of the outer wrapper are its dimensions, the paper's quality, and the paper thickness. Although my initial experiments for proof of concept were with a wax paper outer wrapper, I had to find some historically correct paper to make the cartridges with. The Bienfang Designer Series 100% rag paper fit that bill, as pulp paper at the time of the 1850s and 60s didn't exist. Because I thought that lubrication might be soaking into the Bienfang paper and creating flyers by the paper sticking to the bullet, I secured a supply of no-name 100% rag vellum paper, which had a much better finish to it and didn't seem to soak up the lubrication like the Bienfang paper did. Unfortunately, the supply of no-name rag vellum ran out. I was forced to find a facsimile, and I found one in the Clearprint 1000 HP vellum. It had a similar finish and did not soak up the lubrication. Equally importantly, the Clearprint vellum had a similar thickness to the no-name, that being 3/1000ths of an inch. The vellum sheds cleanly from the bullet, leaving its characteristic confetti on the ground. The frequency of flyers has been greatly reduced. In selecting the dimensions for my outer wrapper, I looked at the 3 historical examples, and again it was the first or earliest pattern that best suited my application. I modified this original design and came up with this template, complete with the 3 scoring marks in the lower left-hand corner. However, this method, when in use, formed a 3rd layer of paper, where the first edge and the last edge of the outer wrapper covered each other, represented here by the red triangle. I decided that I would take a method used by the paper patch community and eliminate this 3rd layer. By angling both sides of the piece of paper with the use of a tin template to cut the corner of the outer wrapper off, I was able then to eliminate this 3rd layer, and subsequently the bullet was covered in only 2 layers of paper through its entire circumference, as shown here on the right. It's important to note that when making the cut of the corner of the outer wrapper, that it must be made parallel to the outer edge, and that the distance between the two is exactly that of twice the circumference of the bullet. The next aspect of the outer wrapper that required some attention were the 3 score marks in the lower left-hand corner. I found evidence, as shown here in the red oval, that the paper was not fully separating at the score marks. There was a simple remedy. Instead of cutting the paper for the length of the bullet, as shown in the upper black mark made here on an outer wrapper example, I ensured that the cut was made longer, as shown in the lower example, so that the paper would completely separate once it left the barrel. As of 1859, there was in fact a 4th cut that was made in the outer wrapper once the cartridge had been lubricated, but I have not yet experimented with this modification. To summarize the qualities of the outer wrapper, ensure that you've got good quality 100% rag vellum paper, angle the cut at the corner to facilitate only 2 layers of paper, and extend the 3 cuts to well past the bullet. Over the course of my experiments, I've used 2 different methods to tie and choke the cartridge. The first, when using the Bienfang 100% rag paper, I in fact dipped the end of the cartridge in a small vessel of water, thus softening the paper and allowing it to be tied and choked at the same time with the same string. This method, however, did not adapt well when using vellum paper for the outer wrapper. The vellum was a good deal stronger, but also a lot stiffer than the Bienfang, and thus the string would simply break when attempting to choke and tie the cartridge. By adapting a small length of nylon cording attached to a dowel on one end and the desk on the other, I fashioned a choking string that I used to first choke the cartridge, then tie it with a separate piece of string. After discovering this method, however, there's no reason to do the wet choking method anymore because the choking string works so well. In conclusion then, I've covered points regarding the bullet, the powder cylinder, the outer wrapper, and choking and tying methods. I hope that some of this information will be useful in your Enfield paper cartridge endeavors.